Welcome to Plead the Facts, presented by KI Legal. On today's episode, KI Legal co-founder Andreas Koutsoudakis is joined by Robert and Max Bookman, partners at Pesetsky and Bookman, to discuss the present and future of liquor and food service licensing.
Welcome to Plead the Facts, joined today by Max and Bob Bookman, two good friends, two good colleagues, and two fellow restaurant, nightlife, and hospitality advocates. These are the people that we're on the front lines with. These are the people that you go to, and we certainly do, and all our clients go to for anything liquor license, permitting related, as well as other licensing aspects, including cannabis, which is a huge new area that's on front and center really on a lot of people's minds. How it plays out, these are the two people who can guide us in the right direction, as well as where we're heading in terms of liquor licenses, the SLA, some really ancient rules, and then just have an interesting conversation. So welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Great to be here.
Good. I have two props here today, which are interesting. One is from Peter Gatien, called The Club King: My Rise, Reign, and Fall in New York Nightlife. Recently, Peter Gatien came from Toronto on a special visa, came and he was at the restaurant Sociable Summit, and he presented, and Bob interviewed him. And I also have the Studio 54 coffee table book, which, behind every major iconic nightlife establishment, restaurant, bar, you name it, is a liquor license lawyer. So, it's kind of the behind the scenes attorney that it literally starts and ends with the liquor license attorney. You guys are the first call even before a lease, because you shouldn't sign a lease unless you get approval from Bob or Max. That's right. For sure. And when you do, you're going to need KI Legal a lot more than you should. So it's really, really, really amazing to hear that Bob was actually Peter Gatien's liquor license lawyer. And really that sparked an urgent interest in bringing them both on to talk about their work, how we work together, what's happening, and what's happened.
Thanks. Let me give you just briefly about who we are and how we got here. So the firm Pesetsky and Bookman started in 1990, and I came from city government. I was counsel at the city's Department of Consumer Affairs, which licensed nightclubs and sidewalk cafes. I did health department work, a lot of stuff that restaurants and bars and nightclubs needed. A mutual friend put me together with Warren Pesetsky, who became my partner for 25 years. He had been former counsel to State Liquor Authority, so he was doing the liquor work, and I was doing all the city licensing work. And nobody was doing all of it. So we started that way, and we organized the industry, a number of trade associations over the decades. So we were not only doing the licensing work, but we were also involved with city government and state government in representing the industry on larger issues, and that's always been our avenue and our path, so that people get a larger perspective of what's going on. When they're dealing with us. Max joined the firm 8.5 years ago. We do have the same last name because he is my son, and it's perfect timing because this is an industry that relies on young people, and Max is actually younger than me, and he gets what's going on now. For example, when the hatchet throwing people came in, I said, you got to deal with Max. I don't even know where to start in getting you a liquor license for throwing,
Still want to go to one of those places.
Throwing hatchets and alcohol, but Max worked with the liquor authority. They worked out, a way of getting a license, and they're licensed.
And it's been really rewarding. I mean, my background was in litigation. That's what I studied in law school. My first 2 years of practice was in litigation, and as rewarding as it is for some, the clients that I was dealing with, it wasn't right for me. And so around the time that I was looking for a new role, a new job, that's when Rob's former partner Warren was set to retire. So we tried it out for a year of working together, and here it is, over 8 years later. And the thing I love the most is the clients. We have incredibly interesting clients, incredibly grateful clients. I mean, you're right, Andreas.
The best clients,
the
for sure.
Well,
the
the liquor license seems like, just one of many regulatory approvals that you need, and it's true that it is, but it winds up being the most important one, and so and it winds up dictating so much about how the business is going to run and be operated, and so the involvement that we have early on in the process and throughout the process, it's at this sort of like delicate phase, and so our clients are really appreciative once we see the fruits of their labors are done and the restaurant is open. It's great to. It's great to see how it works out.
I mean, for me, when you started, that was when my dad had opened Tribeca's Kitchen. So I've known you just as long as I've known Bob a little bit longer with the alliance work that we did early on and things like that. But the liquor, one thing that I noticed and why it's we literally there is no one else that we send liquor license work to. It's because it's not just filling out paperwork, right? It's the same thing like any other practice of law. There is someone who can get away with that, right? But it's not when things are great that it's, you need the lawyer. It's being proactive, right? So for me, for example, you'll call me, I'll get a call from you, and you'll tell me, this is up, we have to do this, because in 6 months, this is what's going to come in the mail, and they're going to ask for this, and we better have gotten a move on it, because they're not going to care that they're slow. Mm-hmm. They're going to expect that you've already accounted for their delays ahead of time 6 months ago. So let's get working on this, because I also know how restaurants are, and it's going to take you longer to do your part. So that proactive part is really important, because if you miss it, you're already in the game, and so the whole business model changes. You can be out of business. What are you going to do? You're going to sue the guy who did your application a year ago? Your business is over. The damage is done, right?
Damage is done.
It's not going to happen.
And we get that too. I mean, because look, restaurant owners, bar owners. I mean, they're busy. They have a restaurant to operate. They have a bar to run. They have staff. They have food. There's a million other things that they're focused on, and so we know that we need to get them focused. And that's we emphasize that exact thing that you said is being proactive early and often follow up with our clients so that things don't fall off their radar. And they're annoyed by it at the time, but they always appreciate it afterwards. And they say to me, they'll say, Max, thank you so much for taking that proactive approach that you did. It paid off, and I had 100 different things that I was focused on, and I'm glad that you made the liquor license one of them.
Yeah, we chase the clients. They don't chase us, which is unusual in the boutique liquor practice world, which tends to be
in the law firm world, right? A lot of attorneys are just kind of in their own.
Yeah, and it's a shame. But we're within. There are more liquor licenses in the city of New York than every state in the country, with the exception of California. I mean, so there's a lot of work out there, and as a result, there's a lot of different quality of practitioners. We pride ourselves on having sufficient staff that and being modern enough that we're chasing the clients, saying, "You still owe us this, you still owe us that. We got to get this filed," and they appreciate that, and it's great when we get a call from a firm like yours who is not waiting to the last second. Like when a big law firm will call us and say, "We're closing on a hotel next week," and somebody realized that what are we going to do with the liquor license? And I say, well,
it's some ancillary thing.
I said, well, I hope you don't plan on closing and having alcohol for the buyer, because that ain't happening by next week. They go, "Oh my God, what do you mean?" So we actually have gone to large law firms who do big deals to teach their transactional lawyers what the issues are and when they need to reach out to somebody like us. Thank God with you, we don't, that. Growing up in the industry and your firm being, doing everything and specializing in hospitality, but there are a lot of lawyers out there that just have no clue.
That's really what it is you guys are ingrained in the hospitality business. I'm sure there's other aspects of licensing and permitting that you assist with, but your core brand, your core involvement practices are so heavily involved in this industry. You know what's happening, you know what's about to happen, what's being debated, what's being discussed, where is their opening, where is their leniency, what do they really care about, and you know how the business operates, so you're asking the right questions.
Let's talk about it, and there's a lot going on now. Let's talk about some of it. With COVID was in many, while it was a disaster for the industry, from a position of the attorneys who represent the Hospitality Alliance and the industry, it was a great opportunity.
Sure.
And we started to get a number of laws passed, some temporarily, and now we're moving to get them permanent. So you really need to be up to date on everything. Maybe you want to go through a few of them, Max.
Yeah, I mean, we had a lot of legislative goodwill during the bad COVID period, and we used that appropriately to get some things that were long on our wish list, but the need for them was intensified by COVID. Get them done. So I mean, I think biggest one that makes a huge difference today is temporary retail permits, and this goes to the exact thing that Rob was just saying about people not thinking about the liquor license until the last minute.
Sure.
Right now, it's taking, I know you know this, it's taking upwards of 8 months for the New York State Liquor Authority to issue a liquor license, and that's up dramatically from what it was.
Well, the standard
only
used to be
recently.
90 days.
Yeah. And it's gotten worse and worse for a number of factors, which we don't need to get into for the moment, but it's taking longer and longer. One of the major ways to relieve yourself of that of the burden of that time frame is to get a temporary retail permit. A temp allows the business that's applied for the liquor license to operate and sell liquor while its permanent license application is pending. Problem was, outside of New York City before COVID, you were able to get a temp pretty much as of right, but within New York City, even though it's a state law, the state law specifically discriminated against New York City and gave New York City an entirely different set of rules that made it very hard and in most cases impossible to get a temp unless you were buying someone's business, and nobody was buying someone's business during COVID.
Right.
Everyone's business was out of business. So one of the laws that we advocated for, wearing our hat, representing the New York City Hospitality Alliance, which I'm not sure if all of your listeners know. Not only do we represent individual license applicants, but we also represent the industry.
They know for me.
They know for
It's
me.
front and center. Every time a new client comes in the door, I make sure that they're a member.
We're counsel, general and legislative counsel to the Hospitality Alliance. Our firm helped found that organization. So wearing that hat, where we do a lot of advocacy, we got a law passed that expands the reach and the eligibility of temporary retail permits in New York City. It's not perfect. There was compromise involved. We'd like to see more. We'd like to build on that success. But now, under the law that we got passed, if you're applying for a beer and wine license, or if you're applying for a beer and wine license, you get a temp, basically as of right. If you're applying for a full liquor license, you can have a temp if the business, if there was a previous business that was licensed in the last 2 years at that location.
2 years. That's a long time.
And we want to build on that success.
It was fine at the time. It's getting long in the tooth now. So we actually have a bill pending for this legislative session, which will end in mid-June. We're hoping to get that 2-year thrown out, because there are a lot of places that closed during COVID. That's more than 2 years ago now.
Mm-hmm.
It also doesn't help new places that are opening, like Moynihan Station. Or a new building. We did SL Greens and one Vanderbilt. It's all new licenses. And so we're trying to get that amended. But that's a great example, and it's complicated, because whether you're a 500-foot case or not. So we go through that with everybody about whether they might be eligible for a temporary.
That's a big issue, right? The 500, 200-foot rules, and I've done a few projects on my own over the years, and I've encountered all of these issues one way or another, whether it's the condo board, and I think the condo board is a big reason why the temp license is appropriate, right? If someone already survived this, the people that lost that argument or approved it before, you get a new person here, that person shouldn't be subjected to a whole renewal of that situation, right? Which is why the temp is a huge component. But you have these 200 and 500-foot rules. Talk a little bit about that. I don't know where that's going to go, but
the 200-foot law has been there since post-prohibition. Makes no sense. It basically, the concept is that good church-going folks and school children shouldn't see people drinking spirits. But you can have a beer garden right next to the church, and that's fine. So it never made any sense. And as every parent of college-age children know, kids do get drunk on beer and wine. So it really doesn't make sense.
Especially when you have people really smoking in the public. You're walking kids to school in the morning.
You can have so you can have a beer garden, but you can't have a fine dining restaurant that needs a full liquor license. And Harlem, for example, has a lot of little churches, and it really hurts the food scene in Harlem, because you can't, it limits the number of locations where, a nice restaurant can open up. The 500-foot law, that came in the early 90s. It's really out of date. It's addressing an issue and an era that doesn't exist anymore. It was, during Peter Gation's era, where people were worried about bunches of late night bars and clubs opening in the same, but we have more than, 3 restaurants in one building, in New York City now. It makes no sense. So there is legislation pending now to adopt about a dozen recommendations that came out of a commission that the governor and the legislature put into law a year ago. The report just came out last week. In those recommendations, it is to eliminate the 200 and the 500-foot law. I think it's probably a big reach to expect that to happen, certainly the first time out. But it has been introduced by State Senator Skouflis, who proposed that commission in the first place. And we'll see. We'll see what happens.
The 500-foot rule, just in general,
but
right?
It also increases temps and puts New York City on an even basis with the rest of the state. It does a bunch of stuff, which would be great. I don't think it's going to pass this year.
The 200-foot rule, both rules there's issues with them, obviously, and that's why we're trying to change them. You guys are working on that. But with the 500-foot rule, that's basically limits the amount of establishments you can have in a small location.
What it really does is that it aggrandizes the role of community boards in New York City. I mean, what it says is that the liquor authority can't issue a liquor license if it's within 500 feet of 3 or more full liquor licenses. But the way that it plays out on the ground is that if the community board is in support, the liquor authority will find public interest, which is an exception to the 500-foot law, and grant the license.
Which means they can pick and choose. But from a restaurant standpoint, any good restaurateur knows that the more restaurants on your block, the more diverse restaurants, the more different types of restaurants, different types of cuisines, the better. Because now it becomes a destination, and I guess that is the part where the community board comes in and says, I don't want it to be that, or I do.
When you know the history of it, you realize how silly and outdated it is. There was a state senator, Padavin, in a neighborhood in Queens, where private homes, came right up to the commercial strip, and a series of biker bars were opening on Bell Boulevard, and the people were complaining, whose houses were right next door to these late night biker bars, to their state senator, who went to the liquor authority, who said, you got to stop issuing these licenses. And they said, we can't. Every license is on its own merit, and if the city zones for it and the applicant is qualified, we have to approve it. So he introduced this law. But it was way broader than anybody. There was no trade association like ours then. There was no voice. The New York State Restaurant Association would have been around, didn't say peep about it. And so you wind up having this law which impacts nightclubs and bars the same as it does a restaurant. And it makes no sense.
Yeah.
And it certainly is out of date. But there are a couple other good things that we got accomplished, which is, and that's outdoor dining.
Huge.
Nobody expected to have the kind of outdoor dining that we got as a result of COVID, and we're almost at the finish line in making that permanent with the city council and the mayor. Alcohol to go, you'll be able to get a drink, a drink of sangria, or a margarita with your Mexican, fajitas was something that no one ever thought would happen. I think that's more likely to become permanent now. Things like that has really helped the industry. Literally, these ideas, came out of our office.
Yeah, 100%, and they're huge because there was, restaurants turning into mini markets. Everyone was in survival mode completely, but there were good products that came out that are directly in line with what the business does,
right? With the alcohol to go, I mean, COVID, the initial pressures of COVID, there was a lot of people just doing what they could to survive, but there was a core aspect of the alcohol to go where people saw a real, there was a real public interest in, which was the ability with more and more people ordering their food through delivery to have a drink, an alcoholic drink from their local restaurant instead of having to go down to the local liquor store and buy a bottle of margarita mix from the grocery store, a bottle of tequila from the liquor store.
Trying to make the cocktail again.
I mean, no one's doing that. Right, so it wasn't taking anything away from the liquor stores because no one was doing that anyway. It was just a lost option for people. And so getting that passed, it's a 3-year law that we got passed. It's been successful. We hope to see it renewed in the next 2 years.
And the liquor stores, they realize it hasn't hurt them. As a matter of fact, they're selling canned cocktails, and we're not objecting to that.
That's right. Yeah, they see the viability. There's a market for it. I mean, you're not going to go into a restaurant and say, I'll take a bottle of Grey Goose to go, right? It's just...
and we got that in the law that you can't.
I know you can now, right? But that's not even something that you would do. What I do think people do, and I do this, is you have some great cocktails at certain restaurants, and you say, okay, I'm going to a 4th of July party. Instead of bringing a bottle of tequila and a bottle of juice, and I'm going to make you drinks, it's easier for everyone, and you have this batch cocktail, which is amazing,
exactly.
Right? And everyone's like, oh my God, what is this drink? It's great, right? Now you're exposing the restaurant, and bringing the specialty component of the restaurants to outside of the establishment locations.
Other things that have been happening, which should be of interest to the industry, if they're applying for new applications, is the Liquor Authority recognizes that this this 8 months, wait is a disaster. They're the first to admit it. We got in last year's budget 30 more positions for examiners. Like a lot of people, they're having a hard time filling them.
Wow.
At the salaries that the state offers, and then training them. So we're hoping to see that'll start paying off eventually. They have a new computer system coming in. But in many ways, it was a very bureaucratic agency, and they have tried to reduce the amount of paperwork that you have to submit now. But the law hasn't changed. So we get people who call us and say, I understand I don't need a certificate of occupancy anymore to get a liquor license. And we say, maybe an expediter told you that, but that's not the case. What's true is we don't have to show the liquor authority your certificate of occupancy anymore, but they make it very clear that if you open a restaurant in a space that's not licensed and legal by the city to have that restaurant, and it comes to their attention, they're going to pull your liquor license.
It's a presumption because you can't occupy the space, let alone serve liquor.
Right.
Correct.
Right? So it's a prerequisite.
Right.
The expectation is with reforms like that and a few other paperwork reforms that they did as well, that it will, as well as the other things, the new staff, the new examiner positions, the new computer system, that the 8-month wait will come down, and their liquor authority is
And so
eager to
corporate
see that happen.
changes, the 10% rule, where you don't have to submit paperwork for people under 10% anymore, but that doesn't mean, and that does make it easier, less paper for them to review. So hopefully they'll be able to eventually faster. But again, the laws haven't changed. So if you're a 1% owner and your last name is Bacardi and you're a part of the Bacardi rum family, you still can't be on a liquor license in a restaurant in the city of New York, even though you don't have to fill out paperwork, anymore. So we spend a lot of time going over that because people get a half a story out there, we just spoke to somebody today who said, friends tell me in Community Board 2, they will not issue a liquor license unless the place has been licensed before. Is that true? I said, well, first of all, it's not true because they don't issue liquor licenses.
When's the starting point then?
Yeah. I said, but it is true that they would rather you, open a place that's been licensed before. But that was more true right after COVID than it is now, when they literally had hundreds of vacant places in their neighborhood. I didn't blame them. Why don't you take one of the vacant ones rather than take a bodega?
Push. Those get expedited review, if you will.
But
right?
But that's changing too. And I explained to this guy if he wanted to do a restaurant closing at midnight. I said, restaurant closing at midnight in a new location, is not going to have the same pushback as if you wanted to do a 4 a.m. bar in a place that's never been licensed before.
Yeah. So what do you see some of the biggest problems just in general from putting aside these major issues that are 100 years old? Things like that, just in terms of the process and things that potentially there's middle ground in meeting, whether it's how the community board gets involved or could be involved in a different way, maybe helping the process or I don't know, what things do you think can be done that maybe haven't been discussed yet, but it's on your, the Bookman wish list.
Well, one good thing that that there has been some recognition of.
I'll hashtag that one.
Yeah. One good thing that there has been some recognition of, and we'd like to see that accelerated, is having the community boards better. The composition of the community boards better represent the communities that they actually are there to represent. Sure. Community boards. There are good people, well-intentioned people,
volunteers putting in a lot of time
on every single community board. It's a thankless job, especially for the ones who volunteer to serve on the liquor license committees of every community board. So that's true. But the truth is that in some areas of the city, we could do a better job at seeing a better diversity and representation on the people who sit on the community boards, both in terms of age, which is a major one, in terms of rental versus ownership status. A lot of times to be on a community board, you need to have roots in the neighborhood, and that usually favors people who are condo owners versus people who are renting, even though it may be a neighborhood that is a majority renters. And so we've seen some recognition of that. There was a referendum that
people in the neighborhood recently versus somebody who's been there for 20 years.
Right. So there was a referendum that took place at the city level a few years ago that put term limits on community board members. They were long-term limits, so none of those terms that were put in place have expired yet. But it matters a lot to the liquor license process, and we touched on we touched on a little bit of this before, but to hit it on the head, because community boards do play a major role early on in the liquor license process. They are advisory bodies, but their advice has a lot of legal and practical implications. And so for businesses that are looking to open in a particular area, if you're shopping for spaces, you're with a broker before you even sign the lease. I mean, when you do come to us to talk about the liquor license, one of the very things that we're going to talk to you about is the community board and what reaction the community board might have to a particular location. So we would like to see
And wanting a contingency in your lease.
contingencies, et cetera. So we in certain areas we would like to see better representation on the community boards, and I think that's you talk about what's sort of on the horizon on the wish list. That's one of them.
I would also like to see a compromise on the 200 and 500 foot laws. I don't think we're going to get rid of them altogether. They're just too ingrained. But I think when it comes to restaurants, I don't think the 200 foot law makes sense. I mean, you may not want to have 4 a.m. bars on the same block, but I think restaurants are benign, they're positive, they're great for the economy, they're great for the neighborhood. I don't think restaurants should be part of either law. I think input, they still, they always were, and I think they're entitled to have input. The liquor authority should listen to their input, but I don't think legally, if I'm applying for a restaurant, it should not be under the same law as I'm applying for a 500 person dance club.
Sure. Yeah, and there's some great places. They might not even have, they might just be breakfast and lunch. I mean, take it to the extreme, right?
Yeah.
You could have places that close at 3, but during lunch, they want to serve more than beer and wine.
That's right.
Right, and that's harmless, right?
You've got locations that, right, they're not within 200 feet of a church or a school, they don't have the same hours.
Right.
They're not open at the same time that the churchgoers and school children are there, but it doesn't matter.
Right.
Yeah.
Another big change. It's a little change, but with big, repercussions that we'd like to see is reform of our state's 3-tier law. Every state in the union has a version of the 3-tier law. It came out of Prohibition. It's a Prohibition-era policy that prohibits individuals who are involved in businesses that manufacture alcohol from also having interests in bars and restaurants, liquor stores as well. So, for example, if you have an interest in a brewery in the Catskills or a vineyard in Italy, or a distillery anywhere around the world, you can't currently own a restaurant or even invest in a restaurant.
Right.
And there was a recognition of this a few years ago before COVID, where there was a bill introduced that didn't go anywhere. COVID actually happened. It was the same legislative session when COVID happened, and so it didn't go anywhere. But to bring New York's 3-tier law more in line with what other states and the federal government have, which is to put a 10% cap on the 3-tier law. In other words, if you are going to be an investor,
what is the 3-tier law trying to prevent? Because from my perspective, I'm listening to this and I'm thinking about how many restaurants are struggling. It's very hard. They're very hard pressed to get investors or new capital in.
Yeah.
But you know what? They have a rock star beverage program, and the beverage manager is more than capable of getting, a huge sponsorship or investment from.
I'll tell you in a second.
brand.
I'll tell you in a second. What the cap does is it says that if you're going to be under 10%, you're going to be under 10% investor in the restaurant, you can have an interest in a brewery somewhere or a
Just an
distillery
investor,
somewhere.
not actively involved in management.
And again, that's what the federal government has. That's what many other states have, and it makes sense because in New York we have. And I see this honestly at this point. I'm seeing this almost once a week when I have consultation calls with people, where there's a lot of European investment, a lot of foreign investment where they don't have these laws that are thwarted from investing in New York, and they're investing in other states that don't have. That do have this 10% cap that we don't have in New York. They're thwarted from investing in New York because they may have some interest, some benign interest in a brewery somewhere, and they can't invest in a restaurant. Why it exists, the short answer is it's a post-Prohibition era policy. One of the issues that happened before Prohibition, and it was a real issue, is that you had breweries that were coming in and they were going to local bars and they were saying, we're going to be your new partner, we're going to take a 50% stake in you, and you're only going to sell our alcohol, and we're going to sell it at a loss, because really what we want to do is just push the alcohol. We're going to push it. There was a lot of underage sales. There was a lot of problem drinking that arose from it. And so after Prohibition ended, the idea was we want to put an end to that. Now, that was long enough ago that no one was alive then, and so everybody forgets it. But if you talk to a lot of the people in the health policy sphere, the alcohol policy sphere, less legal but more policy oriented, they do recognize that was a good idea given the United States' sort of bad history with alcohol regulation. But reforms are needed.
It was also a pro-competition to prohibit vertical integration. Yeah. The idea was we would have greater competition so that
Different segments. You
different
keep everybody
segments,
in their
so that
own.
large manufacturers would not control the retail segment. You would
Sure.
have more mom and pops on the retail side and bigger companies as you move up. It's not a terrible
Not a
idea.
terrible
No, it's been
idea at all.
great. Yeah.
But the 10% rule, under 10% and just being a passive investor is a great idea and has to be done because Max is correct. We're losing out on
Opportunity, and just you look at
investment
the economy now.
And
So they're going to go somewhere, right?
Well, and they're going to Texas, they're going to Florida, they're going to regimes with more favorable alcohol regulations, and so we do need better.
Also, the
reform on
three-tier
that.
law, made sure that everybody paid the same price, that there weren't favored retailers, so there was some good aspects to it. You got to post it, you don't get anything under the table. It's not terrible.
A fair playing field for bars and restaurants. So a little bar has the same access to the same alcohol for the same price as a very large restaurant does, even though they could. So it's there are some benefits to it.
So
and by the way, before you switch, just by the way, you're talking about the three-tier law. I mean, it was the anti-vertical integration piece of it was such a good idea that it was duplicated for our cannabis law, which I know we'll talk very briefly on at the end. And the state's cannabis law, which was modeled very significantly on our alcohol laws, also has a version of the three-tier law to prevent the same type of vertical integration. So you could have small players on the retail side of things that aren't just completely owned by the large manufacturers.
Which is a good concept in general. What's considered anti-competitive, and you have these two different perspectives. One side says the most amount of competitors is what protects competitors the most, and on the other side of it you have economic efficiency and scale, and that results in better pricing, which is the best thing to fulfill the goals of competition. And there's a whole different argument on that.
And
but I agree.
a lot of people will
especially
argue
with
that three-tier makes life more expensive.
Yeah,
It makes
and it
alcohol
probably
more
does.
expensive.
But it does.
It probably does.
In New York, the character of New York, huge believer. It's that spirit that comes out, not in that sense, but it's the character, the spirit, the creativity that comes out of, the guy who sells marbles in Soho. And, whatever it is, there's a place in New York that has that, right? And not 50 versions, 50 of them in every single corner. And so when you take away the ability to be active on a small scale, and you only have these big ones, those are the only people who can afford it, right? And so that changes the whole character. And we started with Peter Gatien. I'm gonna end this part of it, transition to cannabis after this, but that was one thing that he talked about, and we talked about it earlier, that really, really resonated with me, which is, he talked about how when he came into the picture, it wasn't about this demographic and that demographic. It's a night dedicated to them, and you guys have Tuesday night and you have this night. It was, I want 20% of everyone, and that's why it exploded along with so many other places, because people went there and it was literally New York, everything in one place, and everyone was escaping this chaos around them. Diversity was embraced in these types of places.
Fantastic book. You can get it on Amazon. I loved it, not just because I'm thanked in it, but it's a great book. And you're absolutely right. And he talked about that, at the RHA conference, that he democratized, nightlife. It was very segmented. It may have been in the same location, but it was segmented. Different groups had different nights. And he said, I want everybody on the dance floor at the same time. And it revolutionized, the concept of nightlife. And that level of democracy to nightlife was great, because that's what young people wanted. They wanted to mix and mingle, and he accomplished that.
And I think that's why nightlife and socializing is so important. It's not just the economic component; it's the social component.
And that hasn't changed. Look, I've been doing this for 30-some odd years. A lot has, we've gone from, before I got into this, neighborhood bars. Neighborhood bars, we developed in large dance clubs, Studio 54, the Tunnel, all of his large dance clubs. We then, a thing called the lounge was developed. What's the lounge? It was basically a place that looked and smelled a lot like a nightclub, but it didn't have a dance license, so it didn't have a dance floor. But it was lounging. You could drink, and those DJs playing and stuff like that. Today, people are much more oriented towards towards restaurants. And drinking cool cocktails in restaurants. And high-end bars and hotels. Have that now. Not so much. Large clubs. Live music has been hurt dramatically, in New York City over the decades that Max and I were talking about
Yeah.
walking over here, because it's difficult to walk into a community board and say you want to have a live music venue that's going to appeal to young people and it's going to play a kind of music that you on the community board have no clue what it's about and get a liquor license. But regardless of what's in now, what has never changed is people want to go out and they want to socialize. And that's true ever since they put gas lights, on the streets, of the cities, in the early 1800s. As soon as it was safe to go out at night, people wanted to go out at night,
Yeah.
and they do, and they always do. And the question and the challenge for all of us in the industry and for the city is to manage it properly, to regulate it properly, and and make sure it's safe and fun for everyone. But it's a great industry,
Yeah.
and the people in it are extremely creative entrepreneurs.
100%, and it's a balance, and everyone has to. I say this all the time with the team here, when we talk about these abstract concepts, if you will, and how do we fix this problem generally, and it's the general concept is you have to get it out of your head of my way or no way, right? Everyone has to understand that the goal is that, like you just said, this will always be here. So how do we account for what that means, right? Because if nightclubs, restaurants have a really hard time, they're not going to be here, guess what? Your condo is going to plummet in value, right?
Correct.
So it's going to have a ripple effect,
Well, I'll tell you
and everyone
something
needs to
more.
understand that.
There's two choices. The choice, even in the height of the 70s, crimes, people still went out at night. They just knew which blocks to stay off of. The choice is not, are we going to have nightlife or not have nightlife? The question is, are we going to have safe, licensed, regulated nightlife or unsafe, unregulated nightlife?
Exactly.
Those are your two choices, and it's really a non-choice.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't push people into unsafe places with no licenses. God knows what they're drinking, where it came from, no safety laws. We've had some major disaster fires. In New York. Over my time. Happy Land and others. So the question is, how do we get to a properly regulated safe? Because people are going to go out and they're going to want to socialize. And the next thing that they want to socialize with is cannabis.
Yeah, exactly. And so how
Max
does
is the
that?
expert on that.
How does this transition, right? This concept of a cannabis lounge, right? Instead of going and getting 2 bottles of the most expensive champagne or vodka or tequila and hanging around and drinking, you potentially can go out and get,
Well, so
some
Andreas,
cannabis. Tell me about cannabis.
we would have had a lot more to talk about with cannabis, frankly, 2 years ago than we do today. And that's because over 2 years ago now, is when the law was passed. There was a lot of excitement about the law. It was a visionary law, and there was a chance to really get it right. What's happened in the last 2 years, is that the state has fumbled the ball. And there's been misstep after misstep with the rollout of this program, and that's not just me saying it, but that's what pretty much everybody is saying.
That's kind, fumble the ball. Others might say it's a circular firing squad.
Yeah. So right now, what's going on with cannabis in New York is that there's a lot of unlicensed cannabis activity out there, which is having a real chilling effect on the people who want to and been patiently waiting to get into the legal market. It's having a real chilling effect on them because they're seeing under the regulations, which are slow to come out, what it is that they'll have to do in order to get a cannabis license, and then they're seeing somebody, five businesses on the same block openly selling cannabis without any repercussion or any license, and so there's a lot of that. The state has
right next to the restaurant, they can't get a liquor license.
Well, that's right. Exactly.
And they're opening without any community impact plan, without any Libra Peace deal, and all the things they put in the law that the licensed people have to have.
Right. So there's a lot of there's finally some very slow recognition that that's a bad thing that's happening, and so they're trying, late to the game and trying to deal with that. But so that's on the table, that's in play right now. And on the
Cleanup you're talking
the
about.
cleanup, yeah. And on the legal licensing side, we're in slow mode. The state at this point was supposed to have 100 something
It should
licenses.
have been right now 120 stores open, and there is 8.
Right. And there's no opportunity to apply for one of those licenses right now. There was a small window of opportunity where there was an application window where only certain qualifying individuals who had past criminal convictions and had some other characteristics were able to qualify. Everyone who wanted to apply did apply. The window has now shut, and there is no real any serious talk anymore about when the window will open again to the business community at large, entrepreneurs who are interested in getting a cannabis license if they don't qualify under that more favored set of eligibility criteria. So, you talk about cannabis lounges. I mean, all we could talk about with cannabis lounges right now is that
illegal cannabis lounges.
it's something that's in the law. I mean, the law, one day, we thought it would be today. We thought it would be last year. But, one day when the state is issuing cannabis licenses to anyone who, generally qualifies, there is a license category called on-site consumption lounge, which, is visionary. Most states don't have that. It's, it's basically your version of the Amsterdam coffee shop where people can consume cannabis on site, as opposed to buy it at a dispensary and take it home. But there's a lot of
or smoke it on the sidewalk like everybody else is.
But there's a lot. There's more questions than answers right now about what that means. A lot of questions, for example, are number one, how does that interact with New York City's food licensing laws? Number two,
smoking.
How does that interact with New York's Smoke-Free Air Act, which prohibits indoor smoking? Number three, how does that interact with alcohol? We do have an answer for that, but we don't like it. The answer is that you can't have a business that has a liquor license and at the same time have one of these on-site consumption lounge licenses. So one of the things that we, pushed in advocating when the law was being passed was we were saying, and this was the point that you both were making a few minutes ago, New York has the best creative community in the country, in the world, as it relates to nightlife and hospitality and our restaurant scene. We have the most amazing chefs anywhere in the world. They open restaurants in New York. Hotel scene, same thing. Wouldn't it be great if our Michelin star restaurants, if our 5-star hotels would be able to, on the same menu where your partner's ordering a glass of champagne, you could order a cannabis-infused beverage, or together you can order
Cannabis-infused dessert.
Cannabis-infused dessert. And what we were told basically is, well, that's not happening. And so
it's just the unknown, right?
So it's a big. So once you got all those other questions out of the way, it's a big question as to sort of what these on-site consumption businesses are even going to look like if they can't sell alcohol, and it's not even clear if you can smoke weed on the site. I mean, what is it they're actually doing? And so there's a lot of open questions.
What about ventilation? I mean, you have.
Well, you may be able to smell it, but you can't have any food there because the health department won't give you a food permit. So what's the point of?
But even the condo board, right? So I mean, we had so many issues. You still have the same vent running through the whole building.
Right.
You're relying on an old loft that was converted to paper thin wall condos, and now you know what is that going to look like?
More and more condos and high-end rentals don't allow smoking in your residential apartments anymore.
So look, there's some ideas about and we see in some of the places, some of the jurisdictions in California that do allow for some on-site. We see a sort of like more like yoga, mindfulness sort of operations where you go and you may ingest cannabis, you have edibles, you do yoga, you stretch, you do some sort of mindfulness thing. So I'm sure New Yorkers will be creative.
But
with
probably
it,
if you want to go hang out with your friends and have a beer or a glass of wine and and some nachos and smoke a joint. My guess is you're going to have to smoke the joint out on the sidewalk and then come back in and enjoy the rest of your
Some people don't smoke.
anything.
Some people don't smoke. Some people don't drink. Right?
Right.
And you have groups of friends. One does one does the other.
I don't think it's going to be in the same
it's
place.
It's not.
Well, just to put a point on it, I mean, what we have been telling people, and because we get questions about cannabis every day, and we've been involved, since the law was in negotiation, which is several years ago now, when we observed that, like many states, appropriately so, New York modeled its cannabis laws on its alcohol licensing laws. And so what we tell people is, look, we have a built-in expertise on cannabis licensing. It comes from our over 35 years of expertise in alcoholic beverage licensing. The core of the process is the same. A lot of the aspects of the process are the same. And so
they went to the state liquor authority to ask for their paperwork, their
if you know the ins and outs of the SLA, you're going to know what eventually plays out. It's going to be the same.
Right. So we thought it'd be playing out now. Everyone's disappointed that it hasn't. But when it does play out,
you're ready.
We'll be ready.
Yeah.
Right. And we'll have more issues to deal with you then, because like you said, there's not every landlord in a commercial building is going to be okay with it.
We're starting to get those cases.
Yeah, we're going to want to be clear that
red jacket cases where the illegal activity, and now the city's finding the landlord, and the landlord is now has to proceed. They started to come in right now. We got a recent one a couple days ago, so they're active. But to the point regarding not ready, I think there's a huge misconception, and I get it a lot from different clients, family, friends, neighbors, you name it. I want to get, you're in the hospitality space, and let's do something. How do I get into the cannabis business? And they hear from friends that it's happening, and there's some lawyer out there who's going to tell them yes, and only to tell them no later, right? But take their money now. And
that would be a shame.
I think business owners or entrepreneurs or people who want to get in the space, they need to understand that there are people that will tell you whatever you want to hear. Doesn't mean it's true, and doesn't mean you're going to actually get to the finish line just yet, but there is kind of prep work and fundamentals so that they understand that they should engage proper counsel, even if just for education purposes.
Well, and that's what we've done for years now. We are on retainer with 12, 15 different businesses who are interested in applying for licenses when they can. And they want to be educated, and they want to be kept up to date, on every step of the way. That's different. And you should if you're interested in that, so that you're ready on day one. That's different than somebody saying, "I'll take your money and I'll file an application for you," that doesn't exist.
Exactly, and it happens. Unfortunately, it happens, and they don't know better, right?
Right.
In particular, right? They're opening. You have to have some sort of criminal record related to marijuana possession
in the state of New York.
Yes, I agree, Andreas. I've observed it too. There is an anxiety out there amongst people who want to get into this space, and they've heard all these half-truths and misconceptions about what's needed, and how there's a sort of a fast path, a fast lane, and you try to get in faster if you do this or that. And people are talking about signing leases now and stuff like that. And what we do, look, we tell it to people straight. That's one of the things that we've earned a reputation on, is that we're not interested in taking people's money if there's no value that we can add, and even if it hurts our bottom line, it's better for our clients. That's what comes first, of course. There'll be opportunities for the broader business community to get in, and you just have to wait a little longer.
And it may happen sooner rather than later because of the amount of pressure that they are, and negative publicity that they're justifiably receiving about the slow rollout, because it's only these individuals, and these individuals often don't have the financing to open the licenses. So the state was going to get the spaces through the dormitory authority, rent it, build it out, sublet it, lend money to these people, and they did not raise the money that they were supposed to for this fund. So they're going to recognize at a point that we can't wait for these 300 places to actually open statewide, to open up the applications. We have to shut down the illegal locations, and we have to get applications open to other business people.
Do you think a version of the same concept of the way the city and state gives contracts out, which is minority women-owned businesses, right? And so a lot of the bids, contractors, if you show that 30% of this contract is going to a minority women-owned business, and so then you have a contractor, a subcontractor who brings
there is in the law
who is a woman-owned business.
There is that in the law for even the next phase when it opens up to the general world. There's still preferences for that.
I'm talking about preference. So in other words, if they're trying to solve the funding and how do you actually get this thing off the ground, instead of saying only these people do it and let's become landlords now, that's ridiculous to think that the city's going to do that, or the state. You can have a version, instead of the category being when it opens minority women-owned businesses, the category is these people who currently have a preference. And if you do a business venture with them at 30 or 33%, whatever the mark is, now it qualifies and you can expand the bucket. It's a unique idea, but...
I think it's an interesting idea, and I wish, they asked you when they were writing this law. I think what's most important now is, these debates were had over the proper way to, who to focus on, who to emphasize, who not to.
But not how.
In the law. And earlier versions of this law didn't pass because it didn't get enough support for
the social equity stuff.
For the social equity aspects that we're talking about. And so I think the decision has been made that there's going to be this sort of emphasis, and they just need to move forward and instead of move backwards.
It's a unique idea.
I'll give Cuomo credit. He was holding this up as he was saying, you're trying to do too much here. We want to legalize the market. That's a big thing to do. You guys are trying to do too much, and he wasn't approving these ideas of all these categories and the slow rollout with just prior convictions, stuff like that. He basically, when he got into his troubles and he lost a lot of power and influence, he thought it would be a great idea. Let's get this law passed finally. So he agreed to all the legislature's demands on all this stuff, and it turns out he was right.
Yeah, it's too much, and I think
too much.
This concept of giving priority to
growers
not people
are complaining
100% who have this criminal conviction or whatever it is,
right.
but require 30%
Right.
partner or ownership in it. Now you create a scenario where you have the people with the money, the business expertise, looking for the other people who otherwise don't have the other piece, but they have their own expertise and their own qualifications that they're bringing to the table, and it's potentially a great partnership.
Another interesting point
You
on that,
know?
Andreas, is that actually what you're talking about, the bringing together of people who don't have the capital but have the expertise on the one hand, and the people who have the capital but not the expertise on the other hand, that is a traditional and common union that we
Perfect
see in the
union.
hospitality industry.
Yes.
I mean, we see it doing liquor licenses. We see it all the time. That's a common thing. You have a chef who knows how to run a killer restaurant but doesn't have any money, and you have some people who have a lot of money to spend but they don't have a chef, don't run a restaurant, and they get together. And we're also seeing that develop in the cannabis space as well, except we don't, because of the way that the law has been structured and the way that the rollout has happened, those types of unions are not
Allowed.
at the moment.
Well,
You know,
They're really
And
clipping
all
the
or you have to
people
be
they're trying to help.
majority, just as involved as to be a majority owner.
well, right now there's no applications that can be filed. So
No,
whatever
from the
whatever
cured,
window there
the
was
cured one.
Majority won't
And
work.
those applications, I think, they had to be majority,
They had
but
to
they
be
were
majority.
they were allowed to have some partners.
But the
They're
majority,
majority, but
majority is a problem because you're talking about a business that's so undeveloped yet from a regulatory standpoint, and so big capital, the right investors, they're not going to become partners with someone with a criminal record who has no business expertise. That's the reality.
Right, by the way.
They're going to need some
because I got
control.
arrested 10 years ago with a pound of pot, and I was breaking it up into 16 ounces, and I pled guilty to a felony. Doesn't make me an expert on running a cannabis business.
Or any business,
Or
right?
any business.
So that you may know the product really well, and that's the product expertise. But even the chef in your example, that was very generous of you to say that the chef knows how to run a really good restaurant. The chef
Kitchen,
knows
he
how
said.
to
He knows how to run a real kitchen,
make a menu and run the kitchen.
Right.
He still needs an operations guy or girl, right? Needs a director of operations, a GM. There's a million
Oh
different
no,
pieces.
sure. I mean, my point in that illustration is that that's all rolled up onto the one side of the
Yeah,
business.
exactly.
The union of capital and expertise
It's
is
traditional
a common
hospitality.
one.
Yes,
So
exactly.
we'll come back in a year when they're starting to take out
Okay.
cannabis applications.
All right.
We'll talk about what it
Well,
really takes to
And
get
an
into that
update
business.
on the landscape.
Happy
yeah.
Yeah.
to bring in anyone who's watching and listening to learn a little bit more and wants
Yeah.
to kind of dig in deeper and prepare for that. You guys are the guys, I know that for sure.
I mean, I want to end that on a positive note. I mean, it's been a mess. We've talked about that, but this law is not being repealed. I mean,
No.
this law is here. I
Staying.
mean, I think one of the, you could say what you like about the bungled rollout, especially with the illegal, storefronts, but one thing that illustrates is that there is clearly a significant demand in New York State for accessible cannabis. And that's just come out into the open. We've always known that. It's just gone from you go roll the clock back 10 plus years ago, your pot delivery service to now that's out in the open. So there's clearly a demand for it. The state is eventually going to get it right, and
They will
and
eventually get it
that's a good thing. There should be. I mean, on the core of it, there, just like all the other states that have recognized it, and the federal government is coming to recognize it. Just like with alcohol, to tie it all together. I mean, it's in your point on nightlife. It's not a question about whether people are going to smoke pot and consume cannabis or not. It's a question, and it's just like it's not a question of whether they're going to drink or not. It's a question of, are we going to do this in a safe, regulated, legal way? And that's what's going to happen with cannabis too.
Yeah.
It will.
That's good.
And by the way, if there's 1,400 illegal pot stores, according to the city, operating in New York City now, and they're paying rent, we know we could probably have at least 1,400 legal stores in the
stores,
city of
yeah.
New York.
It's amazing. Exactly.
That's a great point.
Right?
And the state gets like 20% tax from
Without
those
secret
sales.
doors behind the register,
Right,
or
exactly.
which one do you want here and there, right?
They're all
They're
paying-
looking at you for 10 seconds first, and then they say, okay, this one,
They're
right?
all paying
I
rent,
see it every
right.
day, right? It's just constant.
Well, this has been great.
I always say, there's always a way, and there's, you can do something the criminal way, or you can do it the right way, right? A good business owner is the one who embraces compliance and figures out how to do it the right way.
Right.
And when you succeed doing that, you're a successful business owner. Anything short of that is cutting corners, cheating. You might make money,
Excellent
but it's
observation.
not a long-term thing. So compliance. If that means you wait, you gear up a little bit better, you try it out in a different market, in another state where it is ready, practice, get it done there if you're really serious about it, and gear up, get the wheels in motion.
Right.
But whatever you want to do, there's always a right and a wrong way to do it, but there is always a way, right? And that's the thing. And
love it.
hopefully we can be the key to that.
Both of our firms are here to help, and anybody who hears this and has questions, just email us and say, you listen to the podcast, and we'll answer your questions. No problem.
Speed dial both ways between our firms.
That's right.
So thank you for listening. Thank you guys for joining. A lot. The list is like, I don't even look at this conversation. And there's even the one that I said, the shortened version of it, I haven't gotten to. 24-hour districts, just things to think about. We talked about cannabis lounges.
Well, we'll be
What
back
is
for
the
more.
future in 20 years? Having seen 20 years back, what does 20 years forward look like?
Good question.
More to
That's a
talk
good
about.
question.
More to talk about. And become an Alliance member if you aren't already.
If you aren't
That's
already.
right.
All right? Constant information from there as well. Thank you for joining, guys.
Thanks
Thanks, Andreas.
for having us.